Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Achieve More podcast. I am your host, Anthony. You can find me on YouTube at Picksburgh. You can also find our special guest co-host on Picksburgh. Shout out to the lady fella for joining us today on the podcast. Anything you'd like to say before we get started?
Hi, and I'm glad to fill in here.
Awesome. And speaking of filling in, check out our co-host Michael over at Huddle Card Collection. You can actually catch him on a live podcast every Wednesday evening, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where he talks about sports cards, collectibles, eBay buying and selling. If you're into that kind of thing, definitely check out Huddle Card Collection. Without further ado, I'm really excited because we have an awesome guest on with us today. Really happy to introduce Terry Tucker. How are you doing, Terry?
I am great. Anthony, Irene, I'm looking forward to talking with you today.
Hey, we're really looking forward to it as well. Just if you wouldn't mind giving a brief overview of yourself for the people at home.
Sure. I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago. I am the oldest of three boys. You cannot tell this from looking at me or from my voice, but I'm 6'8" tall and actually went to college on a basketball scholarship at the Citadel, despite having 3 knee surgeries in high school. I've got another brother who's 6'7", who was a pitcher for the University of Notre Dame. We were talking before we jumped on here. And then another brother who's 6'6", who was drafted by the Cleveland Cavaliers, and I love your gear, in the NBA. And then my dad was 6'5". So we used to joke that if you sat behind our family in church growing up, not a prayer's chance you were going to see anything that was going on, at the front of the church. But our 5'8" mother was the boss. It didn't matter how big, tall, strong we were. Whatever mom said, that's the way it went. When I graduated from college, I moved home. I'm really going to date myself, but this was long before the internet was available to help people find employment. Fortunately, I found that first job in the corporate headquarters of Wendy's International, the hamburger chain, in their marketing department. That was the good news. The bad news was I lived with my parents for the next 3.5 years as I helped my mother care for my father and my grandmother, who were both dying of different forms of cancer. After that, I ended up going to work for the hospital that cared for my father and my grandmother. And then at 37, made a major pivot in my life, became a police officer. Part of what I did during my law enforcement career was I was a SWAT hostage negotiator. After that, started a school security consulting business, coached girls high school basketball. But for the last 12 years now, I've been battling a rare form of cancer. And then finally, my wife and I have been married for 31 years. We have one child, a daughter, who's a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy and is an officer in the new branch of the military, the Space Force.
That's incredible.
Does she live in California by any chance?
She went to tech school in California at Vandenberg, but she and her husband are now in Florida.
Oh, okay. My brother lives near Santa Barbara, and there's actually a Space Force base near there. And so it just reminded me of it. So it was the first time I had ever seen Space Force. I'm like, what is that?
That's really cool.
Yeah, I think we're talking about the same thing. Santa Maria is just north, I believe, of Santa Barbara. And I think that's the Space Force base where she did her training.
Nice.
Small world.
My brother.
Small world. It absolutely is.
Really cool. That's a small world. What was it like going to the Citadel and playing Division I basketball?
It was a blast. It was hard. It was difficult. I don't think I was emotionally mature enough. I lived in Chicago. I went roughly 1,000 miles away to school. I was homesick. And I was going to give up the scholarship. I was going to leave. And I remember walking over literally to tell the coaches, like, no, this isn't for me. I think I made a mistake. And I decided, you know what? I'm going to see if I got any mail. And my dad had written me a 7-page handwritten letter that basically said, pull your head out of your butt. You have a tremendous opportunity here, but you are so in your own way that you've got to get out of the way. This is, when my dad went into the service, he said, I was homesick. Everybody experiences it. You're not unique. You have a tremendous opportunity. And after I finished reading that letter, there's no way I was going to be able to quit. I was no way I was going to be able to let my dad down. And so
You
ended
would
up.
never heard the end of it.
I mean, he was my hero, and there was no way I was leaving. But it was great. I mean, I got to play against. I mean, I think just my senior year in college, it was 1982. We played in what was called the North-South doubleheader, and they took 2 teams from North Carolina, which happened to be North Carolina and North Carolina State, and then 2 teams from South Carolina, which happened to be my school, the Citadel, and Furman University, and we played in the Charlotte Coliseum. So on Friday night, I get to play against Michael Jordan in North Carolina, who that year would go on to win the national championship. And then the following night, I got to play against Jim Valvano and his North Carolina State team, who the following year, 1983, they won the national championship. So without even realizing it, over the course of one weekend, got to play against 2 national championship teams. So it was a tremendous opportunity and something I'm very grateful for.
Yeah, that definitely answers my next question. Like, if you ever got to play against anybody cool, like, yeah, I mean, who's cooler than Michael Jordan when it comes to basketball? Like,
well, it's funny because my middle brother, or my youngest brother, who pitched at Notre Dame, has been a basketball coach in Chicago almost high school his entire life, and he actually coached Michael Jordan's 2 sons when they were in high school.
Wow.
And he tells a
That's
funny
really
story.
cool.
He said, one day I'm at practice, and he said, I'm teaching the kids a drill, and I look up and nobody's paying attention to me. So I look where the kids are looking, and it was over at the door. And Jordan had come into the gym as a dad, to pick up his kids after practice and take them home. And so my brother looks at him and says, hey, Michael, you're a little bit of a distraction. Would you mind waiting out in the hall? And Jordan and his wife were incredibly gracious. And he said, yeah, I'm sorry, coach. I didn't mean to interrupt. I'll wait out in the hall till after practice. My brother thought later, I'm probably the only coach in the history of basketball that ever kicked Michael Jordan out of practice. So.
True. Very true. That's awesome. That's a really cool story. Any interesting stories from the campus when you were there, or just like, I guess, student life at the Citadel?
So when I was there, it was an all-male military school. It is now gone co-ed. And there was an author by the name of Pat Conroy. And Conroy played on the Citadel basketball team. He was probably a decade before I got there, but he went on to be a very prolific author. He wrote a book called The Lords of Discipline, The Prince of Tides, which was turned into a movie with Nick Nolte and Barbara Streisand, The Great Santini, which Robert Duvall played in, wrote a lot of really cool books. Well, he wanted to, or the company wanted to film on campus for the Lords of Discipline. And the Citadel wouldn't allow him to do it. And so there was a big rift that went on during that time. They eventually kind of sort of kissed and made up and that at the end of his life. But it was, I mean, it's just one of those things. It's Charleston, South Carolina. You're sweating, you're wearing a wool uniform. We used to have parades, and there were guys that would just go around and pick guys up off the ground that passed out during parades because it was so hot and so uncomfortable. And it was something that I really am grateful that I got to do and met some great, my basketball coach, I believe, is the only person to coach 3 NCAA Division I basketball teams and also be the athletic director for 3 NCAA teams. So he coached at the Citadel. He was the athletic director at the Citadel. He coached at North Carolina State and was the athletic director at North Carolina State. And then he also coached at East Tennessee State and was the athletic director at East Tennessee State as well.
Is it common for somebody to do both?
It's not. If you look at his career, his first coaching job was at the Citadel, and it wasn't until the end of his career that he came back and became the athletic director. And he had been a North Carolina State grad. And so when Valvano got in a little trouble sort of at the end of his career, my coach, Les Robinson, went in and sort of took over the program from him and then stepped out of the program and became an athletic director. So, yeah, it's pretty rare that, you're doing both jobs because both of those jobs are pretty demanding jobs in and of themselves.
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, after you got done with the Citadel, you ended up going and working with Wendy's. in their marketing department. What was that like? Any cool stories with marketing for them, or were you involved in a lot of their advertising and stuff like that?
I was not involved in the advertising, but I was there when they had an advertising commercial called "Where's the Beef," and I was there.
Remember that one.
Yeah, I was a little Clara Peller, who was about an 86-year-old former hairstylist, beauty operator in Chicago, who had retired and was looking for something to do. And so she kind of became this famous actress because Ronald Reagan, when he was running for office, used the "Where's the Beef" line and things like that. So I was absolutely there during that. Oh, it was so much fun just to watch how all that worked. I mean, I was a kid out of college. I didn't understand business. I didn't understand how things worked in that regard. But just to sort of be there in the heyday when everything was going great. And, I got to meet Dave Thomas, who was the founder of Wendy's.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, a super nice guy, very down to earth. He was adopted as a child. Yeah. And so a lot of the philanthropic enterprises that Wendy's got involved in were adoption related things. And even to this day, Dave's been gone for a number of years, but they still participate in adoption type of programs and that. So just, I met a lot of nice people.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I always found it interesting that they had "Mom" written on her neck on the logo for Wendy's. I was waiting for you to tell me something cool, like, "Yeah, I'm the guy who did that." Like,
well, it's funny because Wendy's name, her real name, and Wendy is one of Dave's children, is Melinda Lou, and nobody could pronounce Melinda Lou, so they called her Wendy, and that's how the name, her name, and then Dave named the company after her.
That's really cool.
Melinda with an M or a W?
M. Melinda. Okay. Melinda Lou.
Interesting.
Nice. Yes. Cool. So you did that for several years. What made you transition into working at the hospital after that?
So when I got out of Wendy's, I was doing new product marketing, and the hospital, like I said, that took care of my dad and my grandmother. I thought they got such great care that I wanted to be part of that, and was just lucky enough that they started a new program development process. It was a fairly large hospital. It was about 1,100 beds, about 5,000 employees. And so they were looking to take the expertise of their employee base and decide, should we start a new program? Should we develop a new, not develop or implement a new piece of equipment or stuff like that? And so I was really kind of the center point of pulling the finance, the marketing, the operations together and making recommendations to, should we do this or does this not make sense for us? So it was the ability to take what I'd learned at Wendy's and move it into more of a healthcare setting in a place that I really wanted to work, and use that techniques, use those skills that I'd learned to do the same thing, only on a healthcare basis.
Nice. That's really cool.
Did you talk to staff at all when implementing new products?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there was a whole, if we did a pulmonary, new piece of equipment. Yeah, we absolutely went with does this work? Does this make sense? Should we do this? Can we, healthcare is a business, so can we monetize this? Does it make sense? Or is it a loss leader, something we're going to lose money on, but it's going to gain us more patients in a different realm and things like that? So everybody was involved, whether it was the suit and tie people or whether it was the nurses or the therapists, whoever it was going to be impacted by the implementation of that. We absolutely involved everybody.
I only ask because I am a nurse. And everything from like equipment to like layout of patient's room, I'm like, do they even ask nurses and the people who use this stuff, like, if this is going to work?
Well, he does.
It's so funny. I remember, so if you're a nurse, you know what JCO is, the Joint Accreditation,
the
JCO.
Thing that we drive?
Exactly. And they come in and they, tell hospitals, whether they're doing the right things or not. But JCO told us that we needed to have liners in all the trash cans in the patients' rooms. And the fire department came in and said, those are a fire hazard. You can't have liners in. So we were like, well, I don't know what we're supposed to do. Meyer says we can't have them, but Jaco says we have to have them. I mean, how do you work that out? But, sometimes there's too many chiefs and not enough Indians, so to speak, so.
Yes. You're like, can you guys just talk to each other and come up with a solution?
For sure. So one thing I've noticed is throughout your career, you've said that you've had to kind of recreate yourself each step of the way. What are some practical things you've kind of done in order to do that? And what kind of advice would you have to other people that might be in the middle of a career change currently or life change of some form?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess I would say, first off, be curious. Always be interested in, what makes that happen, or how does that happen, and how does that implement what we're trying to do? It's kind of like what Irene was saying. Are you going to put something in place, but you're not going to ask the people that actually have to deal with the thing that you're putting in place? So always be curious. And the other thing I'll say, and I guess I need to tell you a quick backstory. So if you look at my resume, it does kind of look like a Super Ball went off in the room. It's sort of all over the place. But there really is. Yeah, exactly. There is a backstory. My grandfather, my paternal grandfather, was a Chicago police officer from 1924 to 1954. And in 1933, he was actually shot in the line of duty with his own gun. It was not a serious injury. He was shot in the ankle. But my dad, who was an infant at the time, always remembered the stories my grandmother told of that knock on the door of, Mrs. Tucker, grab your son, come with us. So when I expressed an interest in sort of following in my grandfather's footsteps, my dad was absolutely not. You're going to college, you're going to major in business and get out, get a great job, get married, have 2.4 kids and live happily ever after.
Yeah. And have a white picket fence.
Yeah, exactly. But that's the life my father wanted me to lead. That's not the life I felt. So when I graduated from college, as I mentioned, my father and my grandmother were both dying. So I had a choice. I could have said, sorry, Dad, I know you're dying, but I'm going to go do my own thing, blaze my own trail, or out of love and respect for you, I will do what you want me to do. So understanding that, my first two jobs were in business because it's what my dad wanted me to do. And I still think, you need to be curious. That's incredibly important. But the other thing I'll tell you is never let your dream die. If there's something in your heart, something in your soul that you believe you're supposed to do, there are a lot of things that are going to get in the way that are going to tell you not to do that, or this is easier, or it's comfortable and things like that. And I certainly could have done that. I was making decent money as a hospital administrator, and it really wasn't that hard of a job, but I gave all that up to basically start at the bottom again, go to the police academy and start out as a rookie police officer at 37 and that. But what I learned from being in business, from being able to talk to all kinds of different people, was able to carry over to what I did as a police officer. So, I guess I don't want your audience to ever think that this isn't going to get me anything. I'm not learning. I'm not doing anything. Yeah, you are learning. And there's always a way to apply that to whatever job or industry that you feel you want to be in.
How was it being a 37-year-old in the police academy?
It was. I took a whole lot more Tylenol than the younger people that were. I will say that I was not the oldest. We actually had a 52-year-old individual who'd been an insurance agent for 20 some years and said, you know what, I want to be a policeman. And so we had a wide range. We had like 18-year-olds, and then we had a 52-year-old. We had several people that did a 20-year career in the military and then decided they wanted to get into law enforcement and things like that. So, I mean, in a lot of ways, I feel lucky because I had some life experience that I was able to bring to that job. I wasn't trying to figure it out while I was sort of growing up, so to speak. So I was very grateful for the time I had in business because it allowed me, and people always tell me today, if I want to be a cop, what do you recommend? And I always tell them, put down your devices. Go out on the street and talk to the homeless guy. Go up to the penthouse and talk to that person. Because if you can talk to all different kinds of people, you can be successful in that line of work. If the only way you can communicate is on a device, you're going to be miserable doing that job.
It's a people job.
It's totally. It's just like a nurse. Yeah. I mean, you have to be comfortable with people at all different areas of their life. When they're happy, when they're sad, when they're dying, when they're hurting, you have to be able to interact with all those different types of people. It's the same way in law enforcement.
You never know what you're walking into when you walk in a room, or when you walk on a scene, or
yes,
or how they're going to react to you being there.
Exactly.
What is it exactly like to do a hostage negotiation with someone?
Yeah, I mean, I wish there was sort of a one size fits all, but it is really it's unique. And I remember when I first started as a negotiator, they gave us a formula of how we as human beings communicate with each other. And that formula was 738-55. So 7% of how we communicate a message with each other are the words that we use. So think how many times you've said something and been like, "Ooh, I wish I had said that," or "I wish I would have said that differently." That's only 7% of how that message comes across. 38% is the tone of the voice that you use with that message. Are you real excited? Are you kind of mellow? Are you down and depressed? What does that voice come across? That's 38%. And then more than half, 55%, of how we communicate a message is our body language and our facial expressions. And they gave us that formula because they wanted us to understand that if you were barricaded in a room with a gun, I was not in the room with you. I was many times blocks away, or at worst on the outside of the door trying to communicate through the door. So we didn't have the luxury of that 55%. We didn't have the luxury of saying something and, be like Anthony, like kind of rolling his eyes like, "Oh, what an idiot. I can't believe he said that." I mean, literally. And so we had to get good, certainly figuring things out based on what people were saying, but also what they weren't saying and how they were saying it. And one of the biggest things that we were trying to deal with, think about any relationship you have with anybody, boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, boss, subordinate, parent, child. The underlying factor that makes that relationship work is trust. And so we were trying to gain trust of an individual that was probably having the worst day of their life, because if you're talking to me and your house is surrounded by the police, you're not having a good day. And many times we had no idea why we were there. What started this? What precipitated this? So we're having to figure all this out. And at the same time, realizing this person is a potential time bomb and at any moment could go off and start shooting or doing whatever they decide they want to do.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
I'd imagine.
You don't realize how much it is body language. Yeah. And when that goes away, or with us with COVID, where facial expressions went away, was how much you communicate with your eyes, with the tone of your voice, with anything else.
You're right. And one of the things we used to do, like I said, a lot of times we get on and say, I have no idea why we're here. Mm-hmm. And we would use what was called tactical empathy. And I think you can get rid of the word tactical and just talk about empathy. In other words, help me to understand what's going on, or help me to understand where you're coming from. And the important word there is understand. Not agree with. I mean, if you were a homicide suspect that just murdered 3 people, I wasn't going to say, "Oh yeah, I totally agree that you should have done that." But by gaining that sort of empathy with people, empathy leads to trust, and trust leads me hopefully to a point where I can get you out safely.
Or come to a peaceful conclusion. Yeah.
Exactly.
For sure.
Even like in the middle of an argument, it's like, hold on, what are you really actually telling me? Are you pissed off at something else, or are you mad at the situation? Or it's, what can I actually do to help you? Like, what's your desired outcome here?
And I mean, you make a huge point there, because there were times where we would spend hours over here talking about something when the real problem was over here, and they didn't trust us enough to tell us what the real problem was. And that's why negotiations a lot of times took 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours to get that person out safely, because you're trying to develop that trust. And one of the things we never did, we never lied to people. I mean, people would say to us all the time, well, I'll put the gun down and I'll come out, but you got to promise me I'm not going to go to jail. And we would have to say, well, when you do come out, you are going to go to jail. And then we would try to deflect the conversation to something that was more palatable. And the reason we never lied is because there was a very good chance that a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, we would be right back negotiating with this person because the underlying cause, and I mean, let's just say it was their mother, their mother pushed their buttons or something like that. Their mother pushed their buttons again 3 years later, and we're back on the scene. And if they ever felt we lied to them, then we had no trust, and we were going to have to bring in another negotiator.
Like you're not going to get anywhere with them.
Exactly. Yeah. Right.
Makes a lot of sense.
What was I going to say? Oh my gosh.
I don't know. You think about that, I'll ask another question.
Right.
So from that, what was it that made you transition into the school security job and coaching the girls' basketball team?
It was really my wife. My wife had supported me. She married me when I was a hospital administrator, and I came to her and said, "Hey, honey, I want to turn our life upside down. Would you support me in this?" And she absolutely did. But then she lost her job, and she's always been the primary breadwinner. I mean, let's face it, you're not going to get rich being a cop. And she lost her job in Cincinnati, and we ended up moving to Houston. And so it was like, well, what skills do I have? What education background do I have? And what can I do with that? And so our daughter was in a private school, and I remember going to them and saying, look, I'd be happy to do this analysis for you. If you like it, if you would just recommend me to other people. They liked it. And that's how I started to work with private independent schools around the United States to certainly assess their physical security, but then also to write their policies and procedures and to train their staff. So it was a fun job. And that was the nice thing about being your own boss. Like during basketball season, I could sort of ramp that down and I didn't have to do as much of it. I could concentrate on basketball. And then after basketball season, I kind of ramp it back up and get more involved in it. So it really allowed me to do two things that I really, hopefully was good at and certainly that I enjoy.
For sure. What was the big difference for you from playing to coaching the game?
It was probably more of who I coached than it was the coaching. As I mentioned, I'm the oldest of three boys. I have no sisters. And I remember when my wife was pregnant, we went to the OBGYN and the doctor was like, would you like to know the sex of the child? And we said, sure. And she said, well, you should buy pink. And I was like, oh, no. You need to leave it in there until it's done. I have no idea how to raise a girl whatsoever. And now all of a sudden I'm coaching girls. And it's like, wait a minute, this is girls are absolutely competitive and tough. But girls play sports for a different reason than boys do, at least what I found. They play more for the camaraderie, for the relationships that they form with their teammates. And I'll give you a quick story. So we're in the middle of a basketball game, and I point to one of the girls on the bench, and I'm like, go in for so-and-so. And, she shakes her head in the affirmative, and I go back to watching the game. But out of the corner of my eye, I can see the scorer's table, and there's nobody there. And so I turn back to her, and I'm like, hey, I need you in for so-and-so. Okay, coach, sure, no problem. And I go back to watching the game. And again, out of the corner of my eye, nobody's at the scorer's table. So I turn back to her a third time. I'm like, get in the game. Now she's like, a major league pitcher in a baseball game, shaking me off like a catcher, like kind of like, and so she's shaking me off. And I'm like, oh my God, are you kidding me? So I bring her to me. I'm like, are we really going to have a counseling session in the middle of a high school basketball game going on right in front of us? And so I said, I need you in the game. Why don't you want to go in the game? The tears start down the cheeks. And she's like, Coach, my friends are in the stands. I don't want to play because if I make a mistake, they'll laugh at me. And I said two things. I said, number one, there's no uniform wearers on this team. You just don't get to wear a uniform and sit on the bench. And I said, and number two, every day you come out to practice, you work hard to make yourself and your teammates better. What about your responsibility to your teammates? And I used that logic to eventually to get her to go into the game. But that would, in all my years playing, in all my years when I coached little boys, middle school boys and stuff like that, there was never if I said go in the game, they would like kill people to get out of the way. But with girls, it's like, no, coach, I'm not doing it. I'm shaking me off. I don't like that sign.
My friends being way too much.
Yeah, it was an entirely different thing that I was not used to. And it was especially like if we would lose, we'd go back on the bus and I'd be pulling my hair out. What can I have done differently? What do we need to change? They're in the back of the bus having a great time, yelling and screaming and having fun. And what are we going to watch on TV tonight? And I'm like, oh my gosh, you got to be kidding me. It was more of a difference of who I coached, not so much that I coached. So
yeah, that's cool.
How is it having a girl?
Well, it's funny because my daughter, fortunately or unfortunately, got my height and is 6'3", and actually went to the Air Force Academy to play basketball. She got recruited to go there. So that part was great. But I mean, I raised her. I hate to say this, kind of like I raised myself, or I was raised. She played a lot of sports. We watched sports. We did all kinds of stuff. She was more of a tomboy than anything.
So you raised her right, is what you're saying.
I mean, we're incredibly close even today. I mean, she's married now. She married one of her classmates who's a pilot in the Air Force, but we talk almost every day, or at least text every day and stuff like that. So I'm very lucky.
You have a great relationship with her, which is awesome.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Okay, you need to talk to my brother, who is almost the same. Okay, he did grow up with two sisters, but he just had a baby girl. And I'm like, I have no idea how you're going to handle this. His wife is more the good person, but he's outdoor gardening or planting and sports and probably has no idea what to do with a baby girl.
Well, I didn't either, believe me, but I learned, and our daughter's a huge Notre Dame football player. And it's funny because, when they don't do well or they lose, you always get a text from her husband. It's like, well, she started throwing pillows and we were afraid she was going to throw the dog, so we put him outside. I mean, she never went to Notre Dame. I mean, she didn't graduate or anything, but she loves Notre Dame football. So they need to do well, and there's harmony in the household. If they don't do well, it's not a good weekend at their house. So
understandable.
Oh, I've had cousins. One was a USC fan. One was the UCLA.
Yeah.
That's the main one that I've seen. Even my sister went to USC, and her husband's entire family is a UCLA fan.
I understand. Believe me. I mean, growing up, we lived in Columbus, so Ohio State, Michigan, same kind of thing. That rivalry.
Yep. For sure. And here in Pittsburgh, it's Pitt and West Virginia, so it's the same here. Probably just a lesser extent because we have the Steelers, and that's the real attraction here in Pittsburgh. But yeah, I mean, 100% get that. Wanted to ask you questions about your cancer journey. Any advice you'd have to people that might be dealing with similar situations?
Yeah. Don't quit. Don't give up. Don't, and for people who think something's wrong, it's not going to get any better by waiting. It's, my dad had end-stage breast cancer back in the 1980s, knew he was sick for months and didn't go to the doctor, and eventually killed him, because it got so far advanced. I'll tell you a story that I think might help people. And it's a true story. It happened back in the 1950s at Johns Hopkins University. And there was a professor there who did an experiment with rats. And he wanted to see how long the average rat could tread water. So he put these rats in a tank of water that was over their head. And the average rat treaded water for about 15 minutes. And just as those rats were getting ready to sink and drown, he reached in, grabbed them, pulled them out, dried them off, and let them rest for a while. And they took the exact same rats and put them back in that exact same tank of water. And on average, the second time around, those rats treaded water for 60 hours.
Wow.
So think about that. First time, 15 minutes. It's not like, your business is going to fail, or you're going to flunk a test, or your marriage is going to go under. You're going to die. And the second time, 60 hours, which taught me two things. Number one, the importance of hope in our lives, that if you're doing the right thing, maybe not today, maybe not this month, maybe not even this year, but there's a good chance, nothing's 100%, that that you'll get to where you want to be. And Irene, you might be able to talk to this a little bit. And the other thing is, we quit, we give up, we give in long before our physical bodies are need to. We quit because our brain tells us, oh, it's uncomfortable, this hurts. Yeah, I don't want to do this, so stop. So we do. But your body can take so much, I'll call it damage. So many things can happen to it, and you can still continue to move forward in your life. So don't ever listen. This is going to sound really weird. Don't ever listen to your mind when it's telling you you can't do something. I can promise you, from my experience, you can always move forward.
I've told patients so many times I tell them, I'm like, it's mind over matter. I'm like, you could do it. I'm like, stop thinking about it. And I'm like, your body could do it. And once it's hard to like talk them through that. And you're like, you don't have to give up. You could do X, Y, and Z. You could breathe even though you feel like you're short of breath. You could fight this. You could handle the anxiety. You could do it.
For sure. And that's fantastic advice too for anyone that's out there struggling. We have a few segments we like to do towards the end of the podcast, and one of them is actually a viewer/listener submitted question, and it actually deals with what we're talking about. So that's why I kind of wanted to skip to it right now. But do you have this is a segment called No Dumb Questions. And the question submitted was, do you have any specific tips or tricks that you do when dealing with pain to like kind of help you push through it?
I do. And it really starts before the pain starts. And I do this every day of my life, so I have no problem recommending it to your audience. Every day, do one thing that scares you, that makes you nervous, that makes you uncomfortable, that's potentially embarrassing. It doesn't have to be a big thing. But if you do those small things every day, when the big disasters in life hit us, and they hit all of us, we lose somebody who's close to us, we unexpectedly get let go from our job, we find out we have a chronic or a terminal illness, you will be so much more resilient to handle those things when they present themselves. The problem is people don't like that. They like staying in their comfort zones. And so when those big things happen, oh, this hurts, this is uncomfortable, I don't like that. I want to get away from that. There's a writer by the name of Ernest Hemingway, wrote a lot of great books back in the 40s, 50s, 60s. And he wrote a book called Farewell to Arms, which is a semi-autobiographical book about his time as an ambulance driver with the Italian army during World War I. And there's a line in that book that I absolutely love. And the line is this: life breaks everyone. And afterward, many are stronger at the broken places. So just like if you were to break your arm and a doctor would set that arm and put it in a cast, when that arm heals, it'll be stronger at the broken places. That's a metaphor for life. Life is going to break you. It's going to beat you to your knees. But if you can continue to move forward, I will promise you, you will come out the other side a stronger individual.
That's awesome.
That is 100% true.
Yeah.
Like, people think it's those wounds that are the weak spots, but it's those wounds that have healed, that have layers and layers of tissue on them that are actually a little stronger. What are the random things that you've done? The little things that you do every day?
I mean, sometimes it depends on the day. I mean, one of the things I hate the dentist, and hate I know is a strong word, but I hate the dentist, going to the dentist. I mean, the other day I picked up the phone and I'm like, all right, I'm going to call and make my 6-month appointment. Well, maybe that's not that much of, that big of a deal. But to me, when you hate the dentist, it is that big of a deal. One of the things I also do when I take a shower, at the end of the shower, I turn the water to as cold as I possibly can. And I just run that over my body for 2 or 3 minutes. Now, I think the science is still out on cold therapy, whether it has all the benefits that people are touting. But if nothing else, it this is uncomfortable. This hurts. I don't like it. So when I go to treatment, and I go every 3 weeks for the tumors I still have in my lungs, I'm like, okay, I did something uncomfortable. I can handle this treatment. It's things like that. I want to get up and I want to go work out, or I want to journal, or I want to meditate, or whatever it ends up being. A third of all Americans admit to hitting the snooze button a minimum of 3 times every morning. Think how much, there you go. Think how much more time you would have in your life if you put your alarm in the bathroom. Yeah, put your alarm in the bathroom and get up early and stuff. It's just doing things you don't want to do. You know what? I'd rather sit here and watch this Netflix, show. But boy, there's a really good book that would make me a better human being. And things like that. Just things that you don't like to do them.
Mm-hmm.
Have you tried anything like changing diet or like homeopathic remedies for cancer? Because I know there's a lot out there.
There is. And I probably have had everything recommended to me. And I am lucky in a lot of ways that I am at a university hospital. So I have access to sort of an oncology pharmacist and just different people that maybe other people don't. And one of the techniques, or one of the tests that my doctor used to use to sort of gauge the progression of my disease was a PET scan. And Irene, you might know what a PET scan is. Don't ask me what PET stands for. It's a name like, this long. But all it does is you get injected with radioactive sugar, with the idea being that cancer cells have a higher metabolism than the rest of your cells. So it will pick up that sugar at a higher rate. And that's what glows on a scan. That's my layman's version of it. So nobody ever told me, but I thought, well, if cancer likes sugar so much, maybe I should try to do more keto in my diet. Yeah. So I don't eat desserts. I don't eat breads. I don't drink soda or alcohol or anything like that. I'm not crazy about it. Will I eat a pizza from time to time? Yes, I will. But I really try to focus on that. I have a thing that my wife makes for me. We call it the Goop. And it's basically an anti-inflammatory turmeric, ginger, honey. It's just a different, and I just take a teaspoon every morning. I do sound therapy, tone therapy with every day when I spend some time sort of unplugged, and I just let this tone sort of go over my body. So I do a lot of things that are not necessarily proven. There's no double blind study that says this 100% works, but if it makes me feel better, I got a feeling it's working for me.
Yeah. I asked because I was vegan or plant-based for a while, and one of the doctors that I would follow was a cardiothoracic surgeon at Cleveland Clinic, I want to say. Mm-hmm. And one of his theories was that certain foods would turn on and off cancer cells. And so
that's interesting.
I was just wondering if but for you, changing diet or eating certain things does improve your stamina and your life overall, that you could actually go live life then instead of
exactly. And and I always tell people I want to look good in a casket. So it's really I want to be eating right. I want to look good. So that's very important to me. Not really, but it's just something.
But it was the idea that food could be medicine, so.
I think in a lot of cases it can be. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's good. It's awesome to hear that it actually does. It has been beneficial to you.
It has.
Yeah.
You're gooping all every day.
Yeah. Final segment we normally have on the podcast is called We Have to Ask, but You Do Not Have to Answer. Sometimes it's off the wall, sometimes it's not. This week it really isn't, but in true nature, you don't have to answer. What would you like your lasting legacy to be?
Talking about looking good in a casket.
He's the most attractive floor.
That's number one. I look in the casket. 100 years from now, nobody's going to remember I was here, and that's okay. One of the nurses who takes care of me now used to be a former hospice nurse. And for those of your audience who don't know about hospice, it's people who take care of others at the end of their life, end of life care. And she gave me a book to read. And the book was called Imagine Heaven. And it's about people who have near-death experiences. And it learned a lot from the book. But one of the big takeaways I came away with it from was, no matter who the person having the near-death experience saw, whether it was God or an angel or a saint or a friend or a relative, whoever it was, almost everybody got asked one question. And that question was, how do you treat my people? In other words, how do we treat each other? And I'm one of these people, I love going deep with people. And there's a professor of psychology at the University of Chicago who does this experiment with his students, but he also does it with himself. And the idea is you go out, you get on a bus, and in 3 questions, you need to be deep with somebody. So you get on the bus, you sit down next to somebody, he's like, hey, how's it going? Oh, it's going fine. How are you? Fine. 1 question. Second question, what do you do for a living? And I'm just making this up. Oh, I'm a doctor. 2 questions. Third question, have you always wanted to be a doctor? No, I grew up on a farm and I wanted to be a vet, but X, Y, and Z happened. Or, my parents were really supportive and thought I'd be great in medicine. So now you're deep with somebody. And, social media allows us to stay on the surface. And so a long-winded answer to your question is, I want to be remembered for the connections, for the relationships that I have in my life today. I don't care if anybody remembers me 100 years from now.
But even you followed in your grandfather's footsteps. So he's being remembered not only because he's your grandfather, but he had a lasting impact on your course of careers.
Yeah, I mean, and considering he died when I was like 8, I mean, that is still.
But you had deep conversations with him while you were 8.
And I wish he'd still been there. I mean, my grandmothers both lived until I was in college, so I got to ask some of those questions, or they were able to answer some of those questions. But I wish he had been around, that I could have talked to him about it.
For sure. So Irene, before we let Terry go today, any final questions you have for him?
I don't know. I feel like this could go on for a while.
So then I guess the better question is, Terry, before we let you go today, do you have anything you'd like to promote for people, to anywhere people can follow you, anything like that?
Yeah, I have a blog / website called Motivational Check. Every day I put up a thought for the day, and with that thought usually comes a question about how maybe you could apply it in your life. I have recommendations for books to read, videos to watch. You can leave me a message. That's all at motivationalcheck.com.
Great. That's awesome.
Fantastic.
What was the thought for today?
Good question. I do these like a month. I do them like a month in advance. I've got to go back and I'd have to go back and look at it. It's on all my social medias and my website.
What's been your favorite one, or one that you've liked?
I like the Ernest Hemingway one. I like the definition of success from a guy by the name of John Wooden, who was a basketball coach at UCLA when I was growing up, and probably the most successful at the time college basketball coach. And he defines success this way: success is peace of mind, which is a direct result of self-satisfaction in knowing that you did the best to become the best that you're capable of becoming.
That's awesome.
That's 100% true. And it's kind of like, if you're happy with your job and know that you're good with your job, it doesn't matter how much money you make. It's sometimes that is a whole lot more important.
I mean, it really is. And he used to be an high school English teacher, and he came up with that comment, or that quote, by saying, if you work really hard in my class and you get a C, are you successful? Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
But if you don't work very hard at all and you get an A, are you successful? Probably not.
Did you learn anything?
No. Yeah, exactly. I didn't learn anything, but I got an A. So, society says, oh, I'm successful. But are you really? I think the guy who got a C, or the woman who got a C, that worked really hard and that was the best they could do, that's a successful individual.
and learn the most from that class or learn the most from that lesson. But yeah, give it 110%, and that is success.
That's awesome. Well, again, Terry, I really appreciate your time today. I know we went a little bit over, but again, thank you. I know that time's the one thing none of us could ever get back. So we really appreciate you giving it to us and to our audience today. Guys, we appreciate you. And do me a favor, leave some comments down below. Go and check out Terry's blog. And until next week, may God bless you. We hope you take it easy.
Thank you so much, Terry.
From the city